Now, let's talk about US President Donald Trump announcing on the weekend that India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. He wrote, after a long night of talks mediated by United States, I'm pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both countries on using common sense and great intelligence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, how tenuous is this peace, this ceasefire, Josh? And what can you tell me about President Trump's offer to work with these nuclear-armed nations to come up with a solution over Kashmir?
Well, this is an extraordinarily complicated and extraordinarily emotionally, religiously fraught conflict there in the Kashmir. Pakistan and India have been at loggerheads, Rita, as you know, for longer than half a century. It has been a very, very, very long time. And both these countries are nuclear powers. So anytime you have two nuclear powers that are directly firing each other and not necessarily firing via proxy, as Russia and the United States have been doing in Ukraine for the past 3 years, but literally just directly, no proxy, just unfettered, but shots fired across the border. That has potential to be absolutely disastrous. So if there is an actual ceasefire and it's a very fluid, kinetic situation, but the last I checked, it looks like things were a lot calmer than they were at least earlier in this past week, then that is news to be celebrated all throughout the world. I think that America fundamentally, and Donald Trump is the right person to do this, has to reassess its relationship with these two particular countries. So back during the Cold War, India was part of the broader Soviet sphere of influence there. They were cozy with communist China, with apartheid South Africa, and so forth there. So the United States made a decision to ally with India's rival, Pakistan. That decision might have been correct at the time. It has not been particularly sound, shall we say, in retrospect. Let's not forget that Osama bin Laden was actually found in Pakistan. Pakistan is increasingly a radical Islamist nation there. America's ally in this conflict is no longer Pakistan. It really actually is India. America and the West in general, Australia, Western-style countries really ought to stand shoulder to shoulder with India for what my money's worth in this conflict there. I think that Donald Trump's the right guy to make inroads there with Modi and the leadership in New Delhi, and I look for those inroads to hopefully continue.
Donald Trump has announced that an American-Israeli hostage held by Hamas since October 7, 2023 is coming home. Trump wrote, I'm happy to announce that Eden Alexander, an American citizen who has been held hostage since October 2023, is coming home to his family. I'm grateful to all those involved in making this monumental news happen. This was a step taken in good faith towards the United States and the efforts of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to put an end to this very brutal war and return all living hostages and remains to their loved ones. Josh, this development comes as reports of a growing rift between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu emerge. What can you tell me about what this means for the war between Hamas and Israel? Is there a truth that there is a rift between these two leaders?
So there's an enormous amount of rumors, and it is very, very difficult to know what exactly is certain and what is not certain. Now, apparently, the asking price that Hamas essentially, again, this is just a rumor, this is not verified, but allegedly the asking price that Hamas asked President Trump in order to free the last American hostage there was to put pressure on Netanyahu to establish a definitive time frame to wind down the military operations in Gaza. The obvious problem is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis are not ready to put a definitive time frame on the operations in Gaza because Hamas is not close to being eradicated yet. Now, they are deeply, deeply hurting compared to where they were on October 6, 2023. That should not be surprised to anyone there. But yes, I think it is fair to say that there likely are increasingly signs of a rift. Maybe there is not a rift at this exact moment, but there are a lot of tense situations. The latest rumors over the past 24, 36 hours are that Qatar, of all countries, might be gifting a Boeing 747 to be an Air Force One backup plane or something along those lines there. Qatar, shall we say, is a problematic country. They are somewhat infamous when it comes to doublespeak. They like to play the nice role of mediator when it comes to these negotiations, but they also are major funders of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood there. The Trump organization recently inked a big deal to develop a new golf course there in Doha. So it's a little difficult to know exactly what is going on here. At the end of the day, though, the American people, and especially MAGA voters, Republicans, really do stand overwhelmingly with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. So if for no other reason than that reason, Rita, I expect that U.S.-Israel relations will continue to be quite close.
Now, a lot has happened in recent days, Josh. We've got a lot to cover, including the US striking a trade deal with the UK. This was pretty big news, but it wasn't long before the usual suspects in the media were out to downplay the significance of the deal. Let's have a listen to MSNBC.
This is relatively low-hanging fruit. If you can't get a trade deal with the longest-standing and loyalist United States ally anywhere in the world over generations, you're going to be in trouble when you're dealing with some of the more obstreperous countries around the world, or ones that are more willing to resist your entreaties.
Josh, if it's so easy, then why didn't previous administrations do it? Why didn't Joe Biden do it? Why didn't the Obama administration do it? What can you tell me about this deal?
Okay, so this deal, I believe, really should shatter a lot of illusions as to what President Trump and MAGA more generally believe about trade and what they do not believe about trade. I think a lot of people look at President Trump, they look at him as the so-called tariff guy, and they say, this guy doesn't believe in trade. He doesn't want to trade with anyone. He wants every single product, every good, every leg of every supply chain to be made here in the United States. It's not true. What nationalists, realists, what MAGA believes is to oppose these multilateral trade boondoggles, these World Trade Organization style trade deals that loop in 20, 30 countries there, and you essentially at some point lose control over the granular details as to what is being traded there. What MAGA supports are prudential, specific, granular, bilateral trade deals. Country A and country B agree to lower trade barriers in exchange for blah, 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 blah. That's the sort of thing that the U.S. and the U.K. worked out. So the fact that this happened, and it happened fairly quickly, actually, barely over a month after so-called Liberation Day at the Rose Garden, the White House there, that actually ought to be an incredibly auspicious and positive sign when it comes to other countries that are looking to negotiate, though. By the way, in response to that clip that we just heard from that, rather upset leftist, shall we say there, I would like to just say one thing. The U.K. and the U.S. do have a special relationship, but the U.S. also got its independence from the UK over 200 years ago. And in fact, if you go back and look at the American founding, Alexander Hamilton published his report on manufacture, and he presented it to Congress as the nation's first Treasury Secretary in 1791, specifically making the argument that the United States had to be trade independent of Britain, because otherwise it would not be a successful nation. So it's actually a very long history of America trying to get independent from Britain there. So actually, it's probably a bit of a bigger deal from a kind of a longer form historical view than this kind of, hurt left-wing commentator would care to point out, shall we say.
And I would say there's plenty of other countries, including my own Australia, that would think we are as bigger allies and to the US as the UK is. So for the UK to get this deal first, I think we'll be wanting to be next in line to strike a deal. Are there other deals that are imminent? Are you hearing other countries are close to an agreement?
Well, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he was in Switzerland this past weekend. So he was meeting with his Chinese counterparts in Switzerland there. Look, Donald Trump put on social media, on Truth Social, the White House actually put out a formal official statement saying that a trade deal had been reached with China. Now, there's not a whole lot in the way of details there, but presumably there's something, because, this came out not necessarily just from social media, but the White House literally put it on whitehouse.gov from their verified social media accounts there. So hopefully we learn more. That's probably going to happen in real time here in the next 24, 48 hours or so. But it looks like U.S.-China could have an off-ramp to this trade war sooner rather than later, which is probably a good thing for consumers, as long as Donald Trump and MAGA and America get concessions out of it. As long as there's something to actually point to and say this is actually a win, then I will be optimistic for it. But again, the devil will be in the details in that one.
Now, we're seeing more leftist officials being arrested. Funnily enough, when you break the law, you'll end up in handcuffs. Here is Newark Mayor Raz Baraka, who was arrested at an ICE facility. That's the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facility that opened last week. Josh, the mayor claims he did nothing wrong and he's vowing to shut down the ICE facility there.
Rita, if I didn't know any better, if I saw this clip in a vacuum of a government official barnstorming a federal immigration facility there with anarchic intention, with the intention of undermining and subverting, and dare I say, seeking to, on a smaller scale, potentially overthrow one facet of the federal government. If I were being a little bit more, shall we say, a little more diabolical, I might say that this looks a heck of a lot like an insurrection, because that's basically what it is. I mean, this is essentially a blue state mini insurrection there. And I mean, who the heck are the Democrats? Who the heck are the left this year? To say that Donald Trump and the whole January 6th thing, no, this was kind of a republic threatening insurrection. I mean, what incredible hypocrisy. But the worst part about it to me is that this says so much about the actual state of the politics of the Democratic Party, meaning what plays politically well for them, what is politically poor. The fact that the mayor of Newark saw fit to do this there, this means that he thinks this is politically beneficial, because that guy wants to run for governor of New Jersey. He views this as a stepping stone for a statewide run. What does it say? That a stunt like this, an insurrectionist stunt, seeking to get arrested, a photo op in handcuffs, that apparently makes you a star in today's Democratic Party. What does that say about that party? Obviously nothing particularly good, that's for sure.
I could not believe the antics afterwards, Josh, because he was on every network playing the victim, pretending like this was political persecution. As you said, he invaded that facility, refused to leave. He was given plenty of choices and plenty of chances to actually get out of there without being arrested, and he refused. I mean, what other choice did authorities have in those circumstances?
They had none. I mean, this guy wanted to be arrested. He literally had every intention of going there and of being arrested for the cameras, because he knew that he would get off there. Two-tier system of justice. Again, it's Newark, New Jersey. It's a very blue jurisdiction there. Democrat governor and on there. But again, he wanted this showdown. Like, he literally wanted this because he thought that it would play well for statewide voters. By the way, New Jersey is actually a politically interesting state. New Jersey is actually not quite as blue as people think it is. In fact, if you look at the 2024 election, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris wins that state. I forgot the exact margin, but it's roughly 5 points, 5.5 points, which actually is really not a particularly wide margin at all. And in fact, Republicans have actually been making inroads in the New Jersey state legislature. As some of these suburbs and exurbs of Philadelphia and New York City trend a little bit redder and a more MAGA direction there's a lot of people speculating that New Jersey could actually be in play at a presidential level in 2028 or 2032 at the latest. So, the mayor, the mayor might think that he is doing this as a political stunt to benefit his career there in the Garden States, but he might actually be in for a rough surprise, believe it or not.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure.